Hello, I'm Margarita Noyes with Lessons Online, and I'd like to welcome you to Spiritual Therapy for Spiritual Diseases. Today we're studying a disease called Gastrimargia. And I want to tell you, this will be a difficult lecture for me to give because Father Paulo's lesson was very long, about an hour. And it took the students maybe 3 days to translate it to me. And it's material that's not very familiar to me. So I want to be very careful to teach this in the best way I can. I'm working from 3 sets of notes, outlines, to try to get you this information because it is very important. Gastrimargia, it's a disease of the soul, which is rampant in America. 97% of Americans suffer from gastrimargia. Maybe more. Probably more. Almost certainly you suffer from it. I suffer from it. It's bad. So let me get into it. But before we get into it, let me remind you, this course is about the primary sin of philautia. That is the trunk of the tree from which all the other sins grow. Philautia, the irrational love of self against yourself. A love of self which causes you to injure and kill yourself. It's a disordered love. It's crazy and illogical and foolish. It's an example of a diseased perspective. That is the root of all sin. And out of philautia grow 3 main trunks. These trunks correspond to the temptations of Jesus, and they are vainglory, gluttony, and avarice, which is greed. So, today we are going to look at one of the 3 trunks, gastrimargia, gluttony. When I say gluttony, you probably think, what? Gluttony? That's nothing. Everybody is fat in America. We know that. We eat. That's not bad. It's according to Father Paulo, when people come to confession, pious souls come to confession and they confess a long list of sins. Gluttony isn't even on the list. It's considered so venial, so small, that it's not even worthy of mention. But gluttony is one of the 3 branches off of philautia, from which come all the other sins. And if you want to combat all of the sins that come off of gluttony, you have to combat the gluttony. Remember last week I said I wished I could make a cartoon visual aid with a tree, and you chop off one of the main branches and a third of the tree falls off. Well, if you could combat gluttony, if you could cut off gluttony from your soul, a third of the sins would drop off. Remember, the tree is sin. The tree is not you. So if a third falls off, that's not a third of you. That's a third of the cancer in your body, leaving clean, healthy flesh, clean, healthy soul. So gluttony is not an insignificant sin. Now, Father Paulo refers to a book that I want to recommend to you. I am purchasing this book right now over Amazon as a used copy. The book is called The Ladder of Divine Ascent. Let me find my notes about that. And it's written by a saint called Saint John Climacus. Let me tell you a little bit about Saint John Climacus. First of all, the word Climacus is Greek for climb, like climb a ladder. So in English, his name might be Saint John of the Ladder. And icons in the Orthodox Church, they have icons, which are pictures that are used to remind people of spiritual realities, show a picture of a ladder or a staircase going from earth to heaven, and up it are traveling holy monks trying to get to God, and at the top is Jesus trying to bring them into heaven to meet God, and they're going up the ladder, and the ladder is steps of virtue, overcoming vice and developing corresponding virtues in a series. And down at the bottom, you have devils shooting at the monks with arrows, and you have some monks falling off, and you have other devils trying to drag people off the stair, and you have holy angels trying to help the monks, and you have a long line of monks and some lay people down at the bottom with St. John Climacus directing them up the path. This is the icon of St. John Climacus in the Orthodox Church. St. John Climacus is one of the most beloved and most well-read theologians in the Orthodox tradition, the Orthodox Church. He lived in the 6th and 7th centuries. He became a monk at the age of 16. He was discipled and mentored by an elderly monk named Martyrius. And after Martyrius died, John wanted to develop his closeness to God more. So he went into an isolated hermitage to live by himself at the foot of Mount Sinai. And for 20 years, he studied the lives of the saints. And he became one of the most learned theologians in the church, one of the most learned and beloved church fathers. He developed amazing wisdom. Even Pope Gregory the Great asked for the prayers of John because he was such a godly man. And eventually the monks, when John was 75 years old, the monks begged him to come and be their abbot. And he did, and he became so well loved because of his wisdom that his writings were treasured by the church for generations and are still read in when the monks in certain monasteries eat. They read holy books and they read the Ladder of Divine Ascent. And the readings are also read during Lent. It's Lent right now. In fact, tomorrow, right now, as I'm recording, it's the 29th of March. The 30th of March is the feast day of St. John Climacus. And his readings are also read as part of the daily office in the Orthodox Church, which is the 24-hour round of prayers being offered around the world by holy monks. So I'm getting the book, and I recommend it to you. Anyway, Father Paulo quotes from the Divine Ascent, the Ladder of Divine Ascent, by St. John Climacus at this point in his lecture. in the book, he allows gluttony to speak for itself. So gluttony is speaking at this point. Gluttony says, my first son is the spirit of fornication, lust. So the eldest son of gluttony, according to St. John Climacus, the son of which gluttony is most proud, is sexual sin. And the church fathers are very clear. Anyone who has sexual sin has a problem with gluttony. Even if you are skinny. Most teenage boys and young men are skinny. But if they have a serious problem with sexual sin, they have a problem with gluttony. You'll see later as I describe gluttony what I mean. But the symptom, sexual sin, proves the disease, gluttony. If a doctor sees a certain symptom, he knows for sure you have this disease. Sexual sin is proof that the disease of gluttony exists in a human soul. Gluttony also says that he has more sons, including hardness of heart, sleepiness of soul. These particular sins and others that come from gluttony, they are not proof of gluttony. Hardness of heart and sleepiness of soul can come from other root sins. Sometimes they come from gluttony, and sometimes they come from other root sins. So they're not proof in the same way that lust is, but they do come from gluttony. Now, let me read you a quote of St. John Climacus. Gluttony is speaking. From me, gluttony, proceed a sea of bad thoughts, the abyss of impurity. Now, Father Paulo points out that this seems a little bit extreme. Gluttony is boasting about his children. Listen to this. My daughters are laziness. Remember, this is gluttony speaking. Gluttony gives birth to laziness, gossip, excessive familiarity. Father Paulo says that excessive familiarity is like a pushy person, a person who attaches himself to you and acts like your best friend, even if you haven't given that privilege to the person. Foolishness, silliness, stubbornness, disobedience, insensitivity, arrogance, ostentation, impurity, impure prayer, distraction, and so on. Father Paulo gave us the whole list of the sins that come from gluttony, daughters of gluttony, so that we would know that gluttony is not a small sin. It's not insignificant. Also, he wanted us to know that gluttony itself is not always the problem. The big problem is the sins that stem from gluttony, the list of which I have just read. But so far we haven't defined gluttony. And when I define it, you may not recognize it. I've been thinking about it for many days, and I am changing my understanding of gluttony as a result of Father Paulo's explanation. So let us look at the definition of gluttony. One moment, please. By the way, I missed one point of Father Paulo's. He said that gluttony is not insignificant. Some of the church fathers say that gluttony is the source of all evil rather than philautia. Actually, some church fathers say philautia, some say gluttony because it was the sin of Adam and Eve, and others say hubris or pride, which was, of course, the sin of Satan. But the fact that some church fathers say that gluttony is the root of all evil shows you that it is a serious spiritual problem, not an insignificant one. So let's go on to the definition. Now, from this point out, Father Paulo prefers not to use the name gluttony for this spiritual disease, but to use its technical term in the Greek, gastrimargia. Now, we have defined gastrimargia in terms of its Greek roots in the past. Gastri has to do with the stomach. Margia has to do with craziness. So gastrimargia is the craziness of the stomach. Let's look a little closer to Greek roots. First of all, margia comes from a word marginein or margian in Greek, which means, from it we get the English word margin. Margin, the margins of the page, is the edge. To go off the margins is to be out of yourself or out of your mind or beside yourself. Crazy. So gastrimargia means an insanity of the stomach, but even more, it relates to the insanity of philautia. It's a use of the pleasures of the stomach to do harm to the person. All of these diseases, it's like autoimmune diseases, where the body attacks itself. All of these diseases we are considering in this course are spiritual autoimmune, where the body attacks itself. Gastrimargia is not an exception. Gastrimargia is when the needs and pleasures of the stomach turn against the body and begin to attack who we are in our spirit and in our body. Eating itself isn't bad. It's a need and a blessing. The pleasure we get from eating isn't bad. It's a need and a blessing. If we weren't crazy and sick, then there would be no problem at all. Let me tell you about a disease that a friend of mine, her son died of this disease. It's rare, but it will kill you if you get it, or it can kill you. In this disease, something in your brain is wrong. So, you never know when you have eaten enough. You never feel full. You are constantly hungry. If you have a child with this disease, from the age of 2 years old, you have to lock up all food. Because if the child wakes up in the middle of the night and feels hungry, he will go out and eat, and the next morning you will find a dead child. The child will keep eating and keep eating and keep eating until their stomach ruptures, because they are always hungry. Also, as the child grows up, they have to understand with their mind that they feel hungry, but they must eat on a schedule for their health. They must eat measured portions at specific times. They cannot eat until they feel full. They must know this and accept it, and they must live with constant hunger, ignoring it because of the wisdom of their mind. Unfortunately, this disease usually comes with mental impairment, mental retardation. So the person cannot understand their disease. So they have to be restrained from eating themselves to death. And they tend to get very fat in spite of their parents and caretakers restraining them. And usually they die young because you can't keep food away forever at every moment. Gastrimargia is a little bit like this. It's a disorder of the brain that gives you wrong attitudes that can kill you spiritually. There are two types of gluttony. You could think of it as type 1 gluttony and type 2 gluttony, kind of like type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Type 1 gluttony is called in Greek Gastrimargia. It means crazy of the mouth. This you can think of as the connoisseur, the person who knows what is best and demands what is best. I have a story about a person. My father went to dinner with this person. Now, this person was pretty wealthy, and he was also kind of fat and very proud of his fine table. Well, he had some wine brought to the table after supper, and he ate first. Well, the wine was poured for every guest, and my father tasted it, and it was the best wine he had ever tasted in his whole life. And my father was raised rich, so he's tasted plenty. This was marvelous. But when the host picked up his glass, he smelled it, and then he took some in his tongue, rolled it around his mouth, breathed over it, and then he decided it is bad. It's turning. That means it's becoming vinegar. It's turning. Pour it out. And he required all the guests had to give up their wine glasses, and he poured, in front of them, he poured the bottle down the sink. Even though my father was like, give it to me, it's good enough. He poured it down the sink and opened a different bottle. And my father said it was no better. The second bottle was no different. And the one that he poured down was very expensive, fabulously expensive. So this may be an example, probably is an example, of type 1 gastrimargia, Gastrimargia, type 1 gluttony. Someone who doesn't care so much about amount of food, but they see themselves as the authority on quality, and they only require the best. They must have the best, and they enjoy the narrow minority of the best of everything. Gastrimargia, crazy of the mouth. Then type 2 gluttony may be more common. Its technical name is Gastrimargia, crazy of the stomach, and it means a person who doesn't care so much about quality, but they just want to eat a lot. They just like to eat. They're going to get a beer belly from drinking cheap beer. They're going to eat chips and fries and nachos and cheese and chili and hot dogs and sausage. Bring it on. And then loosen the belt and have ice cream and a dessert, and then coffee, and then 2 hours later, popcorn in front of the TV. This is gastrimargia, quantity, eating too much, type 2 gluttony. Now, the Holy Fathers don't distinguish between them. And because the remedy is the same. And in this course, we're going to call both of them gastrimargia, because in both cases, the remedy for the disease is the same. But Father Paulo wanted us to know there are two kinds. One is the connoisseur, and the other is what we commonly think of as the glutton, the fat guy, the redneck. Most people in America who are lower class, poor people, have that type of gastrimargia, and the rich can be prone to limargia. Okay, the final point in this section that you need to understand is that gastrimargia is not so much a disease of the stomach or of the body or of the flesh. It's really a disease of the mind. It's an attitude problem. If I could have you understand one thing in this lecture, it would be the point I am going to make now. Let me begin with an example. Some of you are familiar with this example. It has been used before in many contexts. But when a person gets a job in a bank to deal with money, they have to be able to recognize counterfeit money, wrong money, false money. But there are a million kinds of counterfeit. Every criminal has a new way to do it. So instead of training the bank person to recognize counterfeit, we train them to recognize the real money. How does it feel? What are its characteristics? If they know the real money, then no matter what counterfeit comes in, they will recognize it. It's better to study the good and true than to try to study all the millions of deviant forms. So this point is about what is good and true. This is the attitude that nobody has at birth, because all of us are born with gastrimargia. But if you can cut down the trunk of gluttony off the tree of sin, and a whole third of the tree falls off, this is what your good and beautiful attitude toward the gifts of God will be. God made a beautiful creation out of the love in his heart and the divine artistic creativity. And he filled that creation with surprise gifts. Gifts everywhere to please and astonish and bless the creatures that he loved. One of the surprise gifts was the different kinds of food and consumables that we can take in. Now, we can take in fruits, we can take in grains, we can take in all kinds of things. And these things do good for our body while giving us pleasure. Isn't that wonderful? For that gift, we should worship God, bless him, thank him every day. Every day should be a new love meeting between us and God as we encounter our morning cup of tea and the good feeling it gives, and we give thanks. As we encounter our breakfast, giving thanks feeling better afterwards to go out and do a good work. And that good work is also a pleasure for which we give thanks, etc., etc., until we reach our comfortable bed in the night. And our last thought is to give thanks to the God who made sleep a pleasure, a necessity and a pleasure. Those things which are necessary for us are also pleasures to us. That's the way it should be. If we are not diseased, that's how it is. And the attitude is one of looking past the gift to the giver, worshiping him, giving him glory and thanks, loving him, and letting the gift draw me ever closer. I wish I could just show you ever closer, ever closer. Every gift drawing me closer to the heart of God. But we all are born with Brader Willie. We're going to kill ourselves with food instead of letting each gift of God in its correct sequence, correct usage for our health and our benefit draw us close to God. Instead of that, we're going to grab as much as we can and allow it to destroy our soul. I'm going to now give you a series of the counterfeits, the attitudes we have that are not thanksgiving. By the way, I want to remind you also of the story of the bride who received a gift from her groom, a beautiful ring, and she snatched it from him, became so fascinated that she didn't care about the groom anymore. She just wanted to contemplate the ring. And she even left and didn't marry the guy, went home and just kept looking at it. She didn't allow the gift to cause her to throw her arms around her bridegroom. She allowed the gift to cause her to forget her bridegroom. That's a good picture of Gastrimargia. So let's look at some of these attitudes. Okay, first, Father Paulo talks about crimes against the environment. The one bad attitude of Gastrimargia is that we are here to consume and destroy, to exploit the resources of the earth. Think about how people treat animals that are intended for food: chickens, cows, sheep. In America, to learn about what is done to animals to prepare them for food would make you become a vegetarian. It's hard for me to even know how they keep them confined, small spaces, fill them full of hormones, feed them no natural food, just fat food to grow them quickly. Consume and destroy. Trampling over everything just to get what you want. It's the teenager or the kid who eats, comes into your house, grabs the potato chips, eats, drops crumbs everywhere, drinks the Coke, spills it on your rug, throws the can to the side, it falls over, spills, then he gets up and leaves, lays down, goes to sleep, leaving all the mess. Consume and destroy. Children are born with this attitude. They do not naturally think of stewarding their possessions, using things moderately, and giving thanks. They have to be trained. Psychologists talk about the oral fixation. Babies are born just wanting to suck, 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 and then poop, poop, poop. It's the state of humanity, straight out of the box. We have this defect in our thinking. We are born with it. Straight out of the box. That's what they call a problem with your computer, if it was present the first time you started the computer, they say the problem was there straight out of the box. That's how we are with Gastrimargia. We are infected with it straight out of the box from infancy. And the Holy Fathers talk about how we are born with our eyes closed. You know how babies can be born with their eyes closed? But then very shortly they open their eyes. Well, human beings are born spiritually with their eyes closed, but the eyes never open. They're actually born blind, spiritually blind. We have to be healed of our spiritual blindness, which is part of Gastrimargia. Another spiritual attitude that is a problem is thinking that your happiness, your satisfaction, and your well-being comes from what you eat or from what you consume. I have a friend who lives in a house which is very, very cluttered. Cluttered is a kind of messiness. It's a kind of dirty. Cluttered means she has too much stuff. She has not one set of plates to eat off of, but 20 sets in boxes and in stacks all around. Not one set of encyclopedia to get books, to get information, but 10 different sets of encyclopedia, and maybe 2 even the same. She has papers everywhere, toys for her kids everywhere, appliances everywhere. Her house is terribly messy, and yet every weekend she goes yard sailing. A yard sale is a sale where a person who owns a home takes out all their extra junk and puts it on the front yard and lets people buy it for cheap prices, 10 cents, 20 cents. So it's junk, but people buy it because it's cheap. Well, my friend, every weekend, to get away from her horrible house, she goes yard sailing and brings home more stuff. Her car is full of stuff that she didn't unload. This is blindness. She doesn't realize that she needs to get rid of stuff. I offered to help her clean her house, and she said, no, let me have my stuff. I grew up poor. At least now I can have my stuff. She's blind. An attitude that is important to understand in Gastrimargia is the attitude that thinks your well-being comes from your stuff. If you're unhappy and you think, I'll go out to dinner, that'll make me happy. Your happiness is not in dinner. If you are unhappy and you think, I'll buy a fancy car, that'll make me happy. Your happiness is not in your car. Your happiness is not in any material thing. If you think it is, you have a spiritual blindness. You are mistaking the creation for the Creator. You need God, not some creature. It's also easy to see at this point how lust, sexual sin, is connected to Gastrimargia. Gastrimargia is the attitude that takes a thing and consumes it and thinks your happiness is in that thing instead of in the Creator. With lust, the thing is another person's body and the way you feel when you use their body. Objectifying a person is an extension of Gastrimargia. The type of pleasure that you get in lust is not the same as the type of pleasure you get in eating, but the root of taking something created and finding your joy in it, It's the same attitude. That's why the Holy Fathers recommend as the first step to controlling sexual sin is to control gluttony. You know, it's interesting. People can work all day on something that interests them and forget to eat. But if you mention to them, we should fast today, they say, oh, I can't do that. That would jeopardize my health. I can't go without food. If a person is afraid to go without food, that's a symptom of gastrimargia, not in control of your passions, thinking you are dependent and need your pleasures. St. Maximus says that the basic law of philautia is to run from pain and to run toward pleasure. This is the attitude of gluttony when we refuse to fast. We want to run from pain and run toward pleasure. It takes place in our mind. This is why the Holy Fathers call the spiritual diseases thoughts. All the sins, according to the Holy Fathers, are thoughts. They're bad thoughts. These days, if someone comes to confession and confesses bad thoughts to Father Paulo, he immediately thinks sexual, lustful thoughts. But that is not how the Holy Fathers thought of it. To the Holy Fathers, bad thoughts were all the spiritual diseases, because they all result from this problem in the brain, which turns off our wisdom and makes us the slave of our passions. So, we see that the problem of gastrimargia is not in the stomach, it's in the head, it's in our attitudes. It's a perverse logic that says, I want to save myself through food. Food is what's going to make me feel better. I really need food right now to make me happy. One thing that Father Paulo stressed was the distinction between pleasure and happiness. Pleasure comes from the body. Happiness is deeper. It comes from the soul. Food will give you pleasure up to a point, but it won't give you happiness. Sometimes happiness is to be had by giving up pleasure. This is a point we've already studied. We have to keep it in mind. Whenever we seek happiness in physical pleasures, our thinking is wrong. There's something wrong. We are sick in our mind. We are spiritually blind. There's a mistake. It's a margia, a madness, an illogic. We're barking up the wrong tree in a way that will hurt us. It's a deception. Father Paulo tells a story about a woman he met in his parish, and she was a very godly woman. She takes care of her husband, takes care of her children, spends a lot of time in church, doing church activities and good works. Her nickname is Chica of the Church because she lives in the church. And one of her son's friends, teenage friends, mentioned to her that she didn't seem happy. She needed to get a life. And she said, what do you mean? My life is full. And he said, no, it's not. What do you ever do for yourself? You never go out dancing. You never have a drink with your friends. You never go out with your friends. How can you be happy? This boy was confusing pleasure with happiness. The woman, the godly woman, was radiantly happy and fulfilled. But she didn't need those kinds of pleasures to make her happy. In fact, she was much happier than the boy who went out and drank with his friends every night. The blind was leading the blind there, trying to lead. Actually, the blind was trying to lead the one with sight. So, this is the logic of Gastrimargia and the logic of the world. Run from pain, seek pleasure. Happiness is to be had in drinking or dancing or whatever, a fast car, a pretty girlfriend. You just have to get it for yourself. Happiness is there, just take it. Well, the problem is happiness is not there, and you can't just take it. It's false advertising. I recently watched the Star Wars movies. If you are familiar with the prequel, where you see how Darth Vader became Darth Vader when he was originally Anakin Skywalker, I just watched the movie. Anakin Skywalker was in love with Padme, his wife, and he was having visions, dreams of her dying in childbirth, and he was afraid of losing her. So, the evil Darth Sidious, who was the emperor, the guy who became the emperor, tempted Anakin to come to the dark side by saying it will help you to save Padme. The dark side will teach you how to get away from death. You'll never have to die. You can foil death for yourself and your loved ones. So come to the dark side and you can save Padme. Well, the truth was, Darth Sidious knew this. As soon as Anakin came to the dark side, he became incapable of loving Padme. And the next time he saw her, he tried to kill her with his own hands by strangling her, because he thought she had been unfaithful to him. And if Anakin had not gone to the dark side, Padme would not have died in childbirth. His coming to the dark side caused her to die in childbirth. But before that, it made him incapable of loving her anymore. So, it was false advertising. Darth Sidious said, "Come to the dark side and you can save the ones you love." But really, come to the dark side and you will kill the ones you love and you will not care because you won't love them. You'll kill your love and then you will kill your loved ones. False advertising. If you think you're going to be happy because of a purchase of something, that's false advertising. It will not make you happy. If you think you'll be happy because of eating something, it's false advertising. It will make you more unhappy afterwards, especially if you're fat right now. You'll feel worse and more hopeless after eating. If you think you're going to be made happy by a relationship, it's not true. You will probably be made more unhappy because you need this person. You think you need this person to make you happy. That means you don't know how to find your happiness in God and in a proper spiritual life. And as soon as you get the person, they will make more demands on you, which you are not ready to give because you are caught in spiritual blindness. False advertising. What you think will satisfy you, if it is a creature, a creation, will not. It's the blindness of Prater Willi, the disease that will make you kill yourself with food because you're hungry. In the letter of Paul to the Philippians, chapter 3, it says, "There are many among you who have become enemies of the cross of Christ. Their God is their stomach." This is an indictment of people in the grip of Gastrimargia. Their God is their belly. They seek for pleasure and run from pain. They are enemies of the cross of Christ. So, we're not talking about the cure yet. That's next lecture. But I would like to say a word about fasting. People hate fasting. People are afraid of fasting. You're probably saying, I can't fast right now. You're probably saying, forget this, turn off the transmission. Except you're hoping maybe there'd be something better after I talk about fasting. Something valuable to you, something you can use other than fasting. Anything but fasting, because you know you can't do that. Okay, fine. Just listen. Just educate your mind. You don't have to do it unless you want to later. Fasting. Number one, it's not a competition. You're not trying to go, I can go 3 days without food. Well, I went a month without food. A month! Someone else says, well, I did a 40-day fast once. It's not a competition. It's not something that you test your endurance. The whole point of fasting is to get rid of thinking like that. Please, get rid of it. There are various ways you can fast. You don't have to go without all food to be fasting. You could go without one meal, or you could restrict what you eat. For instance, you're not going to have meat for a period of time. You'll have only vegetarian food. That has been called by the modern church abstinence. So we say Catholics abstain on Fridays and Wednesdays in Lent from meat. Abstinence. The Holy Fathers don't use the word abstinence and then differentiate from fasting. It's all one thing. It's all called fasting. The Holy Fathers would call abstaining from meat fasting. It's a form of a fast. Father Paulo has gastritis. He cannot do a total fast, but he can do these modified fasts. Children can do modified fasts. No candy or sweets for a period of time. You think you can't live without candy or sweets? Well, then you need this fast. Everybody can do some sort of fasting. Enough about fasting. Let me summarize this lesson. First, when most people hear the word gluttony, they think fat people. That's why Father Paulo uses the term gastrimargia, the technical name for the spiritual disease. Because when you say gluttony, they think they know what it means. But when you say gastrimargia, people say, what's that? And then you can tell them it's the attitude of looking at the gift and not being able to see past the gift to the giver. It's the attitude of taking the gift and forgetting about the giver and just consuming and destroying. It's the attitude of thinking happiness is here and I can take it. It's in a purchase, something I buy. It's in a food or a drink, something I consume. It's in a person with whom I can have a relationship. Happiness is there, I need to take it. False advertising. Don't go to the dark side and ruin your ability to love. It's a disease all of us have. 100%, we are born with it. Straight out of the box, and it includes a spiritual blindness. The big problem with this is that the wages of sin is death. Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader. He lost everything. Finally, we didn't mention this before, except when I said one of the daughters of gluttony is sleepiness. The Holy Fathers say that gluttony causes your soul to become heavy. Now, after Thanksgiving dinner in America, people roll away from the table and fall onto the couch. Sometimes they miss and fall onto the floor. They are so heavy, and if they're on the floor, they can't get up. Eating too much makes you heavy, but gastrimargia makes your soul heavy. So you see a young man, very skinny, physically fit, but he can't seem to pray. He can't seem to lift himself to God. He can't seem to see or desire the love of Christ. Gastrimargia, it's a symptom. The soul cannot take flight if it's too heavy, and heaviness comes from gastrimargia, the attitude. Can't see the Creator for the creation. Believing that happiness is in the creation. Consume and destroy. Your soul cannot take flight if these are your attitudes toward creation. The Holy Fathers noticed that the monks who physically ate too much fell asleep during the prayers that followed. And they concluded that sleepiness can come from gastrimargia. We have to be careful, though. We have to be like doctors. If you say to a doctor, I have a fever, he'll say, okay, tell me more. What else do you have? Because a fever is a symptom of many different illnesses. He needs more information. So sleepiness is like fever. It could be a symptom of gastrimargia, or it could come from other problems, spiritual problems. So, So there are several symptoms that come from gastrimargia, but also other sources. For example, in addition to sleepiness and distraction in prayer, we have hardness of heart, which also could come from lack of faith, disobedience, willfulness, and obstinance. But lust always comes from gluttony, gastrimargia. In the next lecture, Father Paulo will address how we treat the disease. So for today, we've attempted to describe the disease, its existence, its importance, and its symptoms. It is an offshoot of philautia, which is the wrong, crazy love for self, which kills self. And because the person wants to save themselves, they eat too much, they want to save themselves from pain and run to pleasure, so they eat too much. And our Lord told us, whoever wants to save his life will lose it. We have to have courage. Courage to fast. And also, we have to have courage to cultivate the attitudes which run counter to gastrimargia, which we will learn in the next lecture. Thank you very much.